What's up everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in today to hear about my experience studying abroad in La Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City, and of course, Mexico. Be sure to check out my other study abroad experience video where I talked about my time in Paris, France. Alright, so I studied abroad a total of 2 times. I almost did a 3rd time, but I didn't. And my study abroad experience in Mexico was the first experience I ever had. Okay, so this is going to be a lengthy video, and you can just click on the description bar below and it'll take you to that specific section. So you can really just see whatever it is that's most interesting to you if you don't want to sit through the whole video. So when was I there? I did it in 2014. I was in La Ciudad de Mexico for about 6 months. My actual study abroad program was 4 months, but I stayed a little bit longer. I stayed in an apartment. My university program helped arrange all this in the beginning. I ended up really residing in the Coyoacán, San Angel area, which is, it's near the UNAM University, which stands for National Autonomous University of Mexico, or Mexico, which is the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. I didn't actually study there. I was there on a UC program, once again, University of California program. Okay, let's see. Why Mexico? Well, it's interesting, you should ask me that. Typically when people study abroad, the popular choices are European countries, right? Sometimes Asian countries. But really Latin America isn't the most popular choice that people jump at, right? And for me, I think I have to give you guys a little bit of background on me so that you understand why I made this decision and why I faced a lot of criticism, but I didn't really care. So I am Mexican-American, of course. I am Latina. I was born here in the United States. My parents are from Mexico. They came to the United States when they were in their mid to late teens. And they really, I mean, all their adult life has been here, but you know, the core of their youth, really, yeah, was in Mexico. So a lot of the customs, the traditions, they've bled into my life here, right? Soy Chicana, I'm Mexican-American. I feel, thanks to the study abroad experience, I feel 50-50 on my identity, on my my background, right? So you know, my parents always talk about Mexico, and I had been to Mexico prior, but it was completely different than when I studied there, right? When I went, I visited family. Most of my time I spent in a pueblo, which is a small town, and I didn't really get to explore La Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City, which is vastly different. It's its whole different thing, right? So you know, me having visited a couple of times before had nothing on me spending all this time alone studying whatever in Mexico later on. So you know, I've always been a very avid fan of traveling, and I have a desire to explore and see the world, but I thought to myself, well, the first thing I have to know is where I come from. It's where my family comes from, where my lineage, my blood predominantly is from. So I decided to go to Mexico because I wanted to really know Mexico before I got to know the rest of the world. You know, Mexico is such a part of my identity. It's part of the way I was brought up. It's ever present in my life, right? I speak Spanish fluently. I eat my Mexican food. I have my Mexican customs. I wanted to know the pure source. So that is why I chose to go to Mexico. Of course, there were a lot of people who were like, why? It's so dangerous. Why don't you take this opportunity to go to, you know, Europe or Australia or something different. The study abroad program I did was called the field research program, and I got to go to Mexico, fulfill some of my requirements for my major, which was Chicano-Chicana studies, and I got to develop my own project. And I decided to do a project that focused on children who grew up on the streets, which is, you know, unfortunately a common thing, and I can kind of make a video about that, I guess, really delving into that research. But yeah, I decided to do that research, and I was pretty much on my own for most of the time. I did take courses for about a month or two before I went out and did my actual research. And I had a language class because my report had to be completely in Spanish. So I had a language class, I had a research methodology class as well, and a contemporary history of Mexico class. And it was awesome. You know, but going back to the criticisms of going to Mexico, the people who run the program actually told us that it takes a very special person to come to Mexico, especially during this time when, you know, predominantly the media portrays Mexico as this drug-ridden, corrupt, third world country, essentially. And you know, it's part of the developing world, and yes, this is happening. You know, it would be foolish to negate the fact that there is a problem in terms of you know, the government and the drugs, the cartels, all that stuff. But people are still there, people are still surviving, and certain areas have different concentrations of this problem infiltrated into it, right? So, you know, and I do have family members in Mexico. In fact, most of my family is in Mexico. Was I super close to them? No, because I grew up here in the United States, but I had family, so I did have that advantage. And of course there is danger, like in any major city, but I decided to do it, so why not? So yeah, I went in there, and okay, what preconceptions? Did I have any preconceptions? Well, I had been to Mexico before. I went when I was literally an infant. I was only a few years old, and then I went 2 more times. Both the times I went with my younger brother, and I stayed with family members again. So I kind of already knew some things, but again, living there and just visiting for a week or two is completely different. So really being on my own in the city, right, was I didn't have as much background knowledge, right, on living in the big city, because most of the time, even though I have family in a pueblo and I have family right outside in the outskirts of the city, I spend most of the time in the pueblo. So, you know, I already knew what the pueblo was like. I knew that you know, sometimes I had to take showers with a bucket, but I didn't really have a lot of big expectations for actual city life, and I was definitely surprised. Any culture shock, I still experience culture shock, and I feel like, you know, Mexican-American people have varying degrees of Mexican influence in their lives, right? And I consider myself to be someone who has a lot of the influence. Like I said, I speak the language fluently. My parents are very adamant in the way they raised me. They were very adamant about, you know, and maybe subconsciously, right, but of really having a lot of the Mexican traditions and ideals in the way that I was raised. So you know, I wasn't expecting huge culture shock, but I actually did experience culture shock. And you know, being in the university, and being a Chicano studies major, I had started to academically understand the lived experiences that were part of my upbringing, they were part of my life, and I started understanding the systemic mechanisms that kind of produce some of the conditions that I was raised in, that I am subject to being a Latina in the United States. So it was really interesting to, you know, having this new way of looking at life and at my experiences. It was interesting to go into Mexico City and experience life there. So my one of the biggest culture shocks was really interacting and seeing the upper class in Mexico. I didn't think that there wasn't an upper class in Mexico, but I just really didn't even think about it, right? But there are people that are balling in Mexico, people that I'm just like way more poorer than, you know. And I think the upper class in Mexico gets overlooked a lot because, again, mainstream media just has a certain image of Mexico. But when I went there, I was like, why is this so nice? Why is this bathroom in this restaurant nicer than the bathroom in my house? Like, you know, I had those moments. I had 3-course meals. I had, you know, and I was so blessed because I had American money, and the American money takes you very far in Mexico. So I was living the high life with my American dollars. And it was just like interesting for me to not have thought about that upper class status that does exist in Mexico. It is there, it is prominent, and of course in the city is where you really see it. Of course in the pueblo you don't see it to the same degree or in the same way that you see it in the big city. So that was definitely one of the biggest culture shocks to experience that, bougie life, which exists. There are parts of Mexico City that reminded me of Europe. That is how, and I'm using that as a marker of bouginess because I think that's kind of where it comes from. I'm sorry if you don't know what bougie is. I don't know if it's a SoCal thing to use that word, but it means kind of like fancy, expensive, high life kind of things. And on a kind of unrelated note, another thing that really culture shocked me was the amount of PDA on the streets. It was like everywhere I looked, people were almost eating each other. It was intense. Look, I'm a fan of PDA. I think it's really cute to see couples holding hands and hugging in public displays of affection, really cool. But the degree that, or the amount of PDA that I saw and the intensity of it was really bizarre to me. And I'm not super conservative, but I was seeing spit, I was seeing tongues, I was seeing people lying on top of each other in parks, and that was really interesting to me. And I'm obviously exaggerating, but it was part of the culture shock that I experienced. Now, in terms of the atmosphere and the vibes of Mexico City, it was a city. It was fast-paced. It was kind of like the major cities, New York, LA, that kind of thing. It was very lively. There was something always going on at all times. And this kind of goes into the next topic, which is cultures and customs. Oops, sorry. You feel the centuries and centuries and centuries of history underneath your feet as you're walking through the city. You can, most of what is still there that kind of physically points to the past is colonial, right? Colonial churches, that sort of thing. But there are also some portions of the city that point to the indigenous communities that used to be there, and there are still indigenous communities in the city, but I'm talking about like Aztec peoples, and even people prior to the Aztecs, Teotihuacan, the pyramids are not Aztec. There are peoples prior to the Aztecs, and they're still there and present in terms of the culture there as well. It's an interesting paradox, I think, being in the city, because you have sort of competing influences of the way that the culture is displayed. And I don't know if I'm making sense, but there are metros that have they kind of have museum type artifacts displayed in the metro stations. There are murals celebrating the indigenous aspect of the Mexican mestizo identity, but you have the actual treatment of indigenous people still in the area, which is not great, right? And so you have this place, this country that's sort of celebrating indigeneity and then kind of not. And I wonder to myself how much of it is a touristic ploy, right? Because tourism is one of the biggest sources of income for Mexico, next to, you know, oil and remittances. Tourism is huge, right? So you know, and I'm sure the answer is complicated and more complex than anything I can try and conjure up as an answer, but it is interesting to observe that kind of almost playing up of the culture and the actual treatment of people who still kind of have this culture. And I don't know if I make any sense at all, or if I'm really articulating what I want to articulate, if I'm doing a good job of it or not, but there are a lot of competing forces, I think, in Mexican culture, right? And it also depends on where you're going. You know, if you go to Cancun and you have people in sombreros and you're kind of like, it is the country, is it disrespectful, is it not, you know, all these kinds of things. And of course, if you have your own opinion, and if you've been to Mexico and you kind of observe this, I would love to know your opinion on it. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. But another thing I did want to mention was that it was extremely empowering for me as a young Latina Mexico-Americana to be in the walking on the land of my ancestors. Like it was incredible, and I'll allude back to this when I go to my most memorable moment, but I want to get through a couple of other things before I talk about that incredible moment. So in terms of the people, Mexican people are lively and friendly and just so kind. There is a saying in Mexico that says, donde come uno, comen dos, where one person eats, two people eat. And I've experienced this. I've been to multiple parts of Mexico, not just Mexico City, but people are just so sweet, and they will go out of their way to accommodate you and you know, to smile and to just be nice, incredibly warm people. So I love being in Mexico. It's just such a uplifting kind of experience, morally, and just kind of like the liveliness of Mexicans. Like, you know, we know how to party. So all right, so in terms of the finances, I kind of tapped on the money situation when I talked about the upper class people in Mexico. And you know, as I said, coming from the United States, when I went, the peso wasn't as devalued as it is now, but it was still, $1 was about 16 pesos, right? And with 20 pesos, you got yourself a quesadilla. It's a meal, right? And I am a glam budget traveler, so money went a long way for me. I ended up finding an apartment, you know, after the university had arranged my accommodation. Then they were like, oh, you can stay there or you can look for your own housing, and I found a room for like less than $300, because it was about 300 pesos a month, or 3,000 pesos a month, which is less than $300 for a room. And yeah, it was cool. And anytime I go to Mexico and I'm shopping for my food, I always give the food vendors more than what the prices are, because they're charging baseline, right, and in accordance to their own economy, and I have the power to spend more, so I try to compensate these people as best as I can. And so in relation to food, where did I shop? I mostly shopped at mercados and metro stops. Outside of the metro, there's food, right? And I mean, food in Mexico is divine. It is, it's beautiful. It is. Food is anywhere and everywhere at all times of the day, the night, the evening, at all. Like, food is all day, every day, right? you got munchies at 2 in the morning, well, just go to a metro stop and you got taqueros there, like hooking it up with the most amazing tacos you will ever eat in your life. I do have to say that most people that visit Mexico have to go through this period of having your stomach get accustomed to the food, because it is different. So FYI, I would just be prepared for that. I went through that prior, so it wasn't too bad in the city. I think I actually got worse. I actually like got sick when I went to the pueblo. But anyway, it was all worth it. The food was amazing. I have nothing but good things to say. The vendors are sweet. The food on the street is the best food. There are restaurants, and there are good restaurants, but most of the best food will be just those stands that you see on the street. And I you know, it was beautiful. Yeah, I brought back a lot of food from Mexico. And you know, you have Mexican food available here in the States, and there's just, you know, the source is always different, right? That the food just seemed more potent and concentrated. And the good thing about Mexico City is that you have people coming, you know, it is a big major city, so there are a lot of migrants, and you have, I think, just the best of every state represented, and you know, preparing the foods that are particular typical foods from, you know, those regions. All right, now one of the biggest I think points that everyone wants to know about, it is security. Okay, I was a young woman by myself traveling in Mexico, and I didn't feel any more at risk than I feel in Los Angeles. I truthfully didn't. And you know, I think and I said this in my other video, but it's all about having common sense, and about being aware of your surroundings, and about, you know, kind of not looking like you're scared and afraid of, you know, things. Were men catcalling? Yes, they were. And they, you know, they address this in my orientation, but you know, no matter what you wear, no matter what you do, men catcall, and I think it is a prominent thing in Mexico. But then at the same time, I saw posters on the wall that were kind of protesting, I guess you could say, this phenomenon of catcalling, right? It said it was like a poster with a drawing, and it had a woman. She was saying something along the lines of like, I'm not a this is escaping me. And saying, I'm not a dog, right? Like, don't whistle at me, I'm not a dog. So there was that kind of counter. I mean, I didn't have any real troubles. It was just, you know, there are areas of Mexico that you're just not supposed to go to unless you know people that know the area. And I think any place in the world is like this. There are places that are, you know, public and open and everything, and there are places where your better bet is to go with someone who knows the area, someone who lives in the area, someone who can navigate it. So, you know, you just have to, yeah, you know, there was an advantage, definite advantages of me going as a Latina and going with the program and having family there. But if you you don't have that, I would, you know, I traveled to Mexico with my friend. She's biracial, she's white passing, she is clearly not Mexican, but being with me, you know, she had someone to guide her, someone to kind of bring her in, right, on the things that not all the typical tourists know. And you know, if you do tourist agencies and all those kinds of things, it's different. But if you're like a nomadic traveler and you just want to go and do it, it's always best, and think like in any place, to go with some kind of guidance, or with a friend, or with somebody who knows things. But yeah, you know, in terms of security, I took the metro all the time. You know, it was just a common sense thing. I do remember being told, like, you know, keep your back to the metro. In the metro, keep your back to the wall, and that's something that's applicable to like also metros in Paris, right? And I remember being afraid to just take out my cell phone in the metro, because, you know, I didn't want to get I didn't want to get stolen or anything like that. But I saw people just using their phone all the time, and then I was like, okay, whatever, I can use it too. So, you know, you just have to feel out the things. And then I'm not saying it's like the most secure place in the world, because actually there's only one place where I felt like completely safe just being by myself at like 2 in the morning, and that was Tel Aviv in Israel. But again, common sense, it's a big city. People do steal there, you know. So it's just kind of being aware of your surroundings and knowing where to go, with who to go, right? So all about common sense. But other than that, I think people were very they exaggerated a lot, and most of them came from a good place. But you know, as I said, just keep your guard up and just kind of like don't look afraid. Just do your own thing, mind your own business, and I think you'll be fine. Of course, I'm not liable for anything that may happen to you, but you know, it's a risk that I was willing to take, and that, you know, it worked out for me. And of course, everything that I'm saying comes from my own experience. So yeah. All right, we're almost done. All right, so how's my experience just being a Latina but being a Mexican-American, not being Mexican purely? Well, it was, people knew that I wasn't from there, like you can tell, right? And one of the things that mostly gave it away was my accent, because you know, yo pienso que yo tengo un acento muy bueno, en términos de que mi español no está quebrado, no hablo, no sé, no hablo de una manera que uno pueda decir, no, pues esta no sabe hablar el español. Sí lo sé hablar, y yo creo que lo hablo bien. Obviamente el inglés lo hablo mejor, pero el español lo hablo muy bien. Y pero el acento que tengo no es del DF. El DF tiene un acento muy particular de los chilangos y eso, pero la mayoría de la gente, como mencioné anteriormente, la mayoría de gente que viene a la Ciudad de México es gente de otros estados. Pero ellos dijeron, no, ¿de dónde eres? ¿De dónde eres? Y obviamente averiguaban que no era del DF, pero no siempre averiguaban que era yo de Estados Unidos. So, you know, you could tell I wasn't from there, but you know, I think I tried my best to assimilate while I was there. And people called me gringa. They called me güerita, which is just a thing that Mexican people do. Gringa, güerita, to people who they're not like clearly like born and raised in Mexico. But like I said, I had no problems when people would ask me where I'm from. Sometimes I keep it vague, and you just have to feel out like the situation, like in any place that you are, right? All right, so now I just kind of want to finish off by talking about my most memorable moment, which was incredible. I fell in love with Mexico immediately. Okay, it was a fast falling in love. It was during one of the first weeks that I was there. I was going on a guided tour, somebody that was well known in my university program. And I just remember hearing, you know, we're all walking. I'm in a group of like, I don't know, 10, 15 people. We're walking. The guide is just, you know, spewing historical facts. And I just remember walking into El Zócalo, and which is the main city square. It's the main square where, you know, they do the Yell of Independence. It's a historical square. And I just remember walking out and the city just kind of like opening up to me, and I just felt this sense of pride. I saw like Aztec dancers, I saw vendors, I saw you know, the grand architecture. We walked to the Catedral, the Grand Cathedral, and the cathedral on the outside, it has sort of windows on the floor for you to look into the ground. Obviously, it's like like they've dug up, and you can see human remains there. And you know, just hearing about my ancestors all the way back to the Aztec times, knowing that the Templo Mayor used to be on that ground that I was walking on was powerful. And I kid you not, like oh, Mitchie, I kid you not, I felt this happiness, immense happiness that just felt like I couldn't contain it in my chest. It was just this happiness that I felt to be in the land of my people, learning about all this history that had been neglected to me for, you know, the majority of my K through 12 education. And I didn't really start learning about my culture until I was in college and I took up the Chicano Studies major. So it was magical. First week there, I was just in awe of being in Mexico, and oh god, it was amazing. And I would do it all again exactly the same. Would I go again? Yes. Have I gone again? Yes. I traveled a lot after my study abroad program. I traveled because it's so easy and cheap to travel. I did a lot of cool crazy things, and I would do it all again exactly the same as I did it. It was fabulous. So, you know, if you have any as with these study abroad videos, every section that I went through could be its own video. But if you have any, you know, kind of little particular questions, please feel free to ask me. I'll do my very best to answer you. It was incredible going to study abroad in Mexico DF, and I feel like it really strengthened my bond with that Mexican part of my identity. I was there half a year, and I felt so connected, and it is such an integral part of me, and I don't think I could have established that connection with that kind of depth had I not done it. And I am very privileged that I was able to do it, and as I said, I would do it again. So if you're considering it, I would recommend it, of course. You know, talk to people, other people who have done it, and I don't know, just enjoy it.